And in this first letter, he's just finished explaining to them, okay, if you want to do kind of that religious, vertical thing, knock yourself out, that's fine. But don't forget, the way you treat people is really the number one manifestation of how much you love God and how much you respect what God has called you to do. So in this particular chapter of 1 Corinthians, he explains it. Now, but this is very earthy and it's very gritty, and most of it makes sense, but there's one line in this chapter that doesn't make sense, and in that line is the secret to the decision or the choice that happy couples make. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what may be familiar verses or words that you've heard before, and then we're going to get to this one line that doesn't make any sense, and we're going to camp out there for just a few minutes. So here we go. Here's what he says. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but I don't have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Now, he's just finished telling them, look, because in their religion, they would have these ecstatic utterances. They would speak other languages, or they would think they were. They literally would try to speak the language of the gods or the language of the angels. So he's just finished telling them, okay, if you would like a version of that to be part of your religious experience, that's fine. But don't kid yourself. That's not the main thing. And even if you are actually to tap into the language of angels, but you don't have love, you're nothing but a lot of noise. Now, in my world, this verse, just to be personal for a second, is a great reminder to me, and perhaps a reminder to you, that you should never judge someone like me, or a preacher or a speaker or a teacher. You should never judge someone who does what I do based on my speaking skills or my knowledge of the Bible. Because speaking skills are a talent. It's something somebody develops, just like you have talents that you've developed. If you really want to know what kind of person I am, if you really want to know what kind of Christian I am, you ask my wife, you ask my kids, and you ask my friends. Because a talent or an ability is not necessarily a manifestation of spirituality or great faith. Love is always the bottom line. So he goes on and he says this, and if I have the gift of prophecy, that is, I can tell the future, and I can fathom all mysteries, and I have all knowledge, like I'm the smartest person in the room, and I have faith that can move mountains. I have like perfect faith, whatever perfect faith is. But I don't, there it is again. Have love, I am nothing. Literally in the Greek text, Paul says, even if I'm the smartest person in the room, I can explain anything in the Bible and I can answer any question you have. If I don't have love, whatever that means, he says, I'm a nobody. Which is another great lesson for another day, that Paul says knowledge does not equal deep. If you want to meet somebody who is like a deep Christian and deeply spiritual, knowledge is not the measure. Love is the measure. Then he says this. He says, and if I give all I possess, who would do that? He says, not 10%, not 20%. Even if I give everything I own to the poor, and if I give my body, after I'm finished giving away my possessions, I give my body to hardship that I might boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Now there's so much in this verse. This verse is the nail in the coffin for prosperity theology. I don't have time to go into it today, but here's what the Apostle Paul is saying in this verse. Anybody who gives to get gets nothing from God. Anybody who gives to get gets nothing from God. Anybody who gives to gain gains nothing. Maybe we should come back to that, on another day. But here's the question. What is have love, have love, have love? I gotta have love, have love. I'm sure if we did a survey and I said, how many of you have love? We all be like, I have love, I have love. What does it mean? I don't know, but I know I have it. Because when you hear the phrase have love, it sounds like something on the inside, doesn't it? Like, I have love. And maybe the Apostle Paul thought they're going to think it's some kind of internal thing, some sort of feeling. I feel compassionate toward people who are going through a hard time. I feel sorry for those children. I feel sorry for that couple. I feel bad for what you're going through. I have love. So Paul wants to make it clear to these first century ex-pagan Christians that this isn't an internal thing. This is not a vertical thing. This is a very practical horizontal thing. So he gets really practical. He says, when I say have love, here's what I'm talking about. And then it's like he just kind of goes for it and he gives a sort of a rapid fire list of what love is. He says, love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Now, there's one of these on this list that if you pay attention to it, in fact, for years it kind of bothered me, maybe because of the Bible translation I read when I was growing up. But one of these doesn't make any sense. Because one of these is not completely dependent on the lover, it's dependent on the lovee. And it's this one, always trust. And I used to read that and think, always trust. Okay, that's kind of stupid. I mean, that's a little bit naive to always trust. I mean, I can always protect a person even if they're in the wrong, and I can always hope for that things get better. And persevere sounds like there's going to be some struggles and some trouble, so I can push through. But always trust, and literally in the Greek text, this means always believes or believes everything. That love defaults to trust. And this is a keystone habit for happy couples. Let me illustrate it this way. In every relationship, not just romantic relationships, not just marriage, not just dating, not engaged, but in every relationship from time to time, there is a gap between what we expect someone to do, because hey, I'll be there at 6, or I'll pick you up, or I'll pick up the kids, or I'll have dinner ready for you, or I'll make sure that I tell them, or I'll tell her. There's expectations. And then there's what we experience. And in every relationship from time to time, there is a gap between what we expect and what we experience. And every single time, this is the choice that we make. And oftentimes we don't even realize, in fact, I think most of the time we don't realize we're making the choice because it feels like a response. It feels like a reaction. But every time there's a gap between what we were told someone was going to do or what they led us to believe they were going to do and what they actually did, whenever there's a gap, whenever things don't line up, we choose what we put in this gap. And we either choose to believe the best. I don't know why he's late. I don't know why she didn't. I don't know why they followed through. But you know what? I'm sure they have a good explanation. And when I get all the information, I'm sure it will make sense. Or we assume the worst. That she did it again. He did it again. I kind of expected it. That's how it usually is. Happy couples, make it a habit. Make it a habit to choose to believe the best. This is what it means to believe all things. It is a choice. In the moment, it doesn't feel like you have any choice. And I'm going to say this 10 more times in our time together because I want this to sink in. Every single time there's a gap between what I was told, what I was led to believe, what I was promised. Every time there's a gap between that and what I actually experienced. He didn't come through. She was late again. I don't know where he is. I don't know what happened. I don't know why he didn't. I don't know why she didn't. Every time there's a gap, we make a choice as to what we put here. And happy couples choose to believe the best until they just can't believe the best anymore. This is a keystone habit for happy couples. Now, that's what the Apostle Paul wrote a couple thousand years ago. Interesting, in 2005, an author and speaker and thinker, Marcus Buckingham, wrote a book called, we'll put it up here for you, The One Thing You Need to Know. This is a book about business management and leadership and making progress. It's an extraordinary book. I have our staff read this years ago. And in this book about organizational skills and being a better leader and better manager, he uses an illustration to illustrate his point that actually makes our point. And in this book, he cites a 20-year study, a couple of decades. Over 20 years, a group studied happy couples. They studied happy couples in the US, in Canada, in Europe, and they were looking for, as you might expect, they were looking for a common denominator. Now, when I say happy couples, these were couples that had gone the distance, they'd been together a certain amount of time, and they still enjoyed each other's company. These were not couples who were just grunting it out, staying together for the kids. We're miserable, but we can't afford to, split up. Not that those couples. Couples who've been together for a long time, who were still in an enjoyable relationship, and they were asking questions to lead them to what is the common denominator for happy couples. Now that's a pretty good question. Wouldn't you like to know? Yeah, should have charged admission for today. This information is super helpful. So when they went into this study, like anybody that does research, they had some assumptions, and one of their assumptions, in fact, their primary assumption was they expected that they would find couples who'd gone the distance, who'd had some bumps along the way, but still loved to be together. They assumed that they would find that over time, these couples had downgraded their expectations of the other person as it relates to their motives, their character, and their virtue. In other words, that over time they'd realize, well, you know what? He's not as great as I thought he was. She's not as great as I thought she was. So I'm just going to lower my expectations. I'm going to have a more realistic view of my husband or my wife or my partner. And so consequently, we'll be able to stay together. Their study showed the exact opposite. In fact, they asked each person in these couples lots and lots of questions. And they had an opportunity to rate themselves and then rate their spouse, in this list of questions. And consistently, happy couples rated each other. Happy couples rated each other more positively in every quality than their partners rated themselves. In other words, they gave their partner higher scores than their partner, their husband or wife, gave themselves. They had, as it turned out, it was unrealistic. They had an unrealistically positive view of the person that they were with. In fact, one of the summations of this study was that love is actually blind. That is true, because they seem to be blind to the deficiencies in their spouse. And then the description went on to say this, that this positive view that they had toward the other person created what they called an upward spiral of love. I know, an upward spiral of love. Okay, I know it sounds kind of creepy, but so they said it was like it just kind of built on itself and went up and up and up. At the end of this study, here was their recommendation. Now, this is so powerful. Their recommendation was this. In a relationship, find the most, and I love this phrase, find the most generous explanation. When there's a gap between what I expected and what I experienced, come up with the most generous explanation for the other's behavior, and then believe it. Come up with the most generous explanation for the other person's behavior, and then just decide to believe it. Believes all things, always believes. Choose to believe the best. To which I say, can you say, ruby red slippers? You have had the secret the whole time to a happy relationship. You just need to click your heels together 3 times and read your Bible, okay? Because it's been there the whole time. Now, obviously, there are things that make this challenging and difficult. And again, I've been doing what I've been doing a long time. I've talked to all kinds of couples, walk couples through all kinds of stuff. So I am not naive. So there are obstacles to this. But even regardless of the obstacles, and we'll talk about 2 in just a second, I don't want you to miss this point. Every single time there's a gap, even when it's the same gap over and over, every single time, what you place here is what you decide to place here. And you will either believe the best or you will assume the worst, but whichever way you go, it is a decision, it is a choice that you have made. That's what I don't want you to miss as we wrap up this series. Now, there are obstacles to this. There's a couple obstacles. One is what we experience, right? But he did it again. She did it again. It's like clockwork. The other thing that's an obstacle that we bring to the relationship is who we are. Because let's be honest, we didn't show up in the relationship as a blank slate, right? We showed up in the relationship with all of our stuff, and all of our baggage, and all of our father wounds, and our mother wounds, and our grandfather wounds, and my older brother wounds, and just all, my former boss wounds, and that boyfriend that I stayed with for way, way too long, and I found out, I was like one of 3, and all those wounds, we bring all of that stuff. So some people have a more difficult time trusting than others. We bring our history, we bring our baggage, our fear, insecurity. And because of that, there are certain behaviors that trigger certain responses in all of us. We can't help that. But here's what I want you to hear. Even with all your junk, even with all the stuff you bring, and even with all the inconsistency of the person that you love and are in a relationship with, it is still a choice every single time. And let me just kind of dig a little bit, okay? Because I've been doing this a long time. Suspicion is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay? If you assume the worst for, lots and lots of time, eventually, I promise, you will find something to actually be suspicious about. And here's why. Because when you're in a relationship with a person that has low trust, you're on pins and needles all the time. When you're in a relationship with a person that you feel like is kind of looking for you to do something wrong, you are never at ease. You are always off balance. And you will be so careful, and you will be so cautious, and you will be so controlled in your behavior and your words that you will appear to be up to something, even if you're not. And it won't be your fault. If you have low trust because of the past, if you have low trust because of previous relationships, when you bring that to a relationship, you may accidentally create an environment in the relationship that sets the other person up to do the very thing you fear they will do that they had no intention of doing. Because suspicion and low trust in a relationship is almost always a self-fulfilling prophecy. It sets the stage for the very thing you fear the most. That's why you need to pay attention to who you are, not just what the other person is doing. And both of these are important, but it's so much easier, isn't it, to focus on what they said and what they did as opposed to who we are in the relationship. But even with all of that, we still get to choose.